Picture this. It's 6 in the morning in 1730s Osaka. And while most of the world is still figuring out how to trade basic goods without getting stabbed, Japanese merchants are already running the world's most sophisticated financial market. We're talking about a place where rice wasn't just food, it was money, politics, and power, all rolled into one grain. Welcome to the Dojima Rice Exchange, where they accidentally invented the future of global finance while trying to figure out lunch prices. You might think futures trading started in Chicago with a bunch of guys in loud jackets screaming about corn. Wrong. The real birthplace of modern financial markets was a crowded district in Osaka where merchants wearing traditional robes were doing deals that would make Wall Street traders weep with envy. These guys were trading contracts for rice that wouldn't even exist for months, using margin calls and clearing systems that wouldn't show up in the West for another 2 centuries. Here's what makes this story absolutely wild. Rice in Japan wasn't just some crop you ate with dinner, it was literally money. The entire economy ran on something called the koku system, where everything from samurai salaries to tax payments was measured in rice. 1 koku equaled about 5 bushels, or roughly what one person ate in a year. Your social status, your wealth, your ability to survive. It all came down to how much rice you could control, and the place that controlled rice prices for the entire country? That was Osaka, specifically the Dojima district. Osaka earned the nickname Japan's Kitchen because every grain of rice that mattered passed through its warehouses and markets. When Dojima sneezed, the entire Japanese economy caught a cold. Prices set in this single district determined what samurai got paid in distant provinces, what city dwellers paid for their daily meals, and whether local lords could afford to maintain their armies. We're talking about a level of economic influence that would make modern commodity exchanges jealous. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Dojima Rice Exchange wasn't just moving physical rice around, they were creating something that had never existed before. They developed standardized contracts for rice that wouldn't be harvested for months, created a system where you could buy and sell these promises, and built an entire infrastructure around trading what was essentially thin air, backed by future grain. It was like inventing the internet before electricity, except instead of cat videos, they were revolutionizing global finance. The morning bell hasn't even rung at Dojima, and already the district is buzzing with activity that would put a modern trading floor to shame. Picture narrow streets packed with more financial innovation per square foot than anywhere else on Earth. Warehouse workers are hauling sacks of rice that represent fortunes, while clerks with ink-stained fingers scribble numbers that will determine whether entire provinces eat well or go hungry. The real action starts before dawn in the licensed warehouses scattered throughout the district. These aren't your typical storage facilities. They're basically the Fort Knox of rice, with more security than most medieval castles. Every grain that enters gets inspected, graded, and certified by officials who take their jobs more seriously than food critics at a Michelin restaurant. The grading system was incredibly precise, with different classifications based on quality, origin, and even the weather conditions during a harvest. What made these warehouses revolutionary wasn't just the storage, it was the paper they generated. For every batch of rice stored, they issued warehouse receipts that circulated like modern currency. These weren't just simple IOUs either. They were sophisticated financial instruments that specified exact quantities, quality grades, and storage locations. You could trade these receipts without ever touching a single grain of rice, creating a parallel economy that existed entirely on paper. The genius of this system becomes clear when you realize what was happening. Daimyo lords from across Japan would ship their rice tax collections to Osaka warehouses, receive these receipts, then trade them for silver or other goods without the massive hassle of physically moving tons of grain around the country. It was like having digital money 3 centuries before computers were invented. But the real innovation was just beginning. Smart merchants figured out that they didn't need to wait for rice to actually arrive before they could start trading it. They began creating contracts for rice that would be delivered months in the future, standardizing everything from quantities to delivery dates. These forward contracts allowed farmers to lock in prices before harvest, merchants to secure supplies before they were needed, and speculators to bet on everything from weather patterns to political upheavals. By 7 in the morning, the brokers' guilds are setting up their operations like generals preparing for battle. These weren't casual traders throwing around loose change. They were sophisticated financial professionals who'd spent years learning the intricacies of rice markets. Each guild specialized in different aspects of the trade, from spot transactions to complex forward deals that wouldn't settle for months. The physical setup was surprisingly modern for something that happened 3 centuries ago. Large chalkboards displayed current prices for different grades and delivery months, updated constantly as new information flowed in from across Japan. Clerks armed with brushes and ink moved like lightning, recording transactions and updating ledgers with the precision of human computers. Runners darted between different trading areas, carrying messages and confirmations faster than most people could walk. What's fascinating is how information traveled in this pre-telegraph world. The Dojima merchants had developed an elaborate communication network that would impress modern logistics companies. Flag signals from rooftops could transmit basic price information across the district in minutes. Lantern codes worked for night trading sessions. Mounted couriers carried detailed reports to Edo and other major cities, creating a web of financial information that kept the entire country connected to Osaka's price movements. The morning price-setting process was like watching a massive, coordinated dance. Representatives from different brokers' guilds would gather around specific boards, shouting offers and bids in a controlled chaos that somehow resulted in clear, agreed-upon prices. These weren't random numbers either. They reflected real supply and demand from across Japan, filtered through a network of regional dealers who understood local conditions better than any modern economist. The standardization was remarkable. Instead of dealing with countless varieties of rice from different regions, the Dojima system reduced everything to a manageable number of standard grades and lot sizes. This meant a contract for premium rice was exactly the same whether it was traded by a merchant in Osaka or a samurai in a distant province. They basically invented the concept of commodity standardization that modern futures markets still use today. But here's where the Dojima system gets really impressive. They figured out how to trade rice that didn't exist yet. Forward contracts allowed merchants to buy and sell rice for delivery in specific future months, creating a market for agricultural production that wouldn't happen until the next harvest. A merchant in spring could secure rice for autumn delivery, locking in both price and supply before a single seed was planted. This forward trading system solved massive problems that had plagued agricultural economies for centuries. Farmers could sell their crops before planting, guaranteeing income and reducing the risk of price crashes at harvest time. Merchants could secure supplies months in advance, ensuring they could meet their customers' needs regardless of weather or political disruptions. Even the government benefited, as stable rice prices made tax collection and budget planning much more predictable. The risk management aspects were incredibly sophisticated. Merchants learned to hedge their positions by taking opposite sides of different contracts, protecting themselves against price swings that could wipe out their businesses overnight. A rice dealer who needed to buy large quantities for autumn delivery might simultaneously sell contracts for spring delivery, creating a balanced portfolio that generated profits regardless of whether prices went up or down. By 8 in the morning, the first wave of serious trading is underway, and you can see why this system was so revolutionary. Unlike traditional markets where you bought what existed and hoped for the best, Dojima allowed traders to construct complex strategies based on their expectations of future conditions. It was like having a crystal ball, except instead of magic, they used sophisticated financial engineering that wouldn't look out of place on a modern derivatives desk. The psychological impact of this system can't be overstated. For the first time in history, farmers and merchants could sleep at night knowing their financial futures weren't completely at the mercy of weather, warfare, and random market fluctuations. They'd created a way to transfer risk from people who couldn't handle it to people who specialized in managing it. It was insurance, banking, and investment, all rolled into one elegant system. And this was just the morning warm-up. As the day progressed, the Dojima Rice Exchange would demonstrate even more innovations that modern financial markets still rely on: margin systems, clearing mechanisms, and regulatory oversight that kept this complex machine running smoothly. These merchants weren't just trading rice, they were building the foundation of every futures market that would follow. As the morning trading hits full swing, something remarkable happens that would make modern risk managers bow down in respect. The Dojima merchants had figured out a problem that still keeps financial regulators awake at night. How do you guarantee that someone will actually deliver the rice they promised to sell 6 months from now? Their solution was something they called margin deposits, except they invented it 3 centuries before anyone in the West had even thought about it. Here's how it worked, and trust me, it's more clever than anything you learned in business school. Before you could trade a single forward contract, you had to put up what we'd now call margin, a deposit that proved you were serious about your commitments. But these weren't just random amounts thrown around to make trading look official. The Dojima system calculated margin requirements based on price volatility, contract size, and even the reputation of the trader involved. The really brilliant part was how they handled price movements. Every day, contracts were marked to market, meaning if rice prices moved against your position, you owed more money immediately. None of this waiting until settlement nonsense that could leave everyone holding the bag if someone decided to disappear. If you'd promised to deliver rice at a certain price, and that price had gone up, you had to post additional margin by the end of the trading day, or your position got liquidated faster than a samurai drawing his sword. This daily settlement system created something that hadn't existed before: real-time financial accountability. You couldn't just make promises and hope things worked out later. Every single day, the market forced you to prove you could back up your commitments. It was like having a financial babysitter who checked your homework every afternoon and made you redo it if you'd made any mistakes. The brokers themselves acted as a clearing system that would make modern clearinghouses jealous. They didn't just facilitate trades, they guaranteed them. When you made a deal through a Dojima broker, that broker became personally responsible for making sure both sides of the transaction actually happened. If a merchant failed to deliver rice or couldn't pay for a purchase, the broker had to step in and make everyone whole. Talk about skin in the game. But here's where it gets really sophisticated. The brokers didn't just eat these risks, they managed them like professional risk managers. They maintained detailed records of every trader's positions, monitored concentration limits to prevent any single client from taking on too much risk, and even developed early warning systems for when market conditions started getting dangerous. Some brokers would actually visit their clients' warehouses and businesses to verify they had the resources to honor their contracts. The margin calls were legendary. If you couldn't meet a margin requirement, you had exactly 1 business day to come up with the money or rice. No extensions, no negotiations, no excuses about your dog eating your warehouse receipts. The system was ruthless about maintaining financial discipline because everyone understood that one major default could bring down the entire market. They'd rather kick out a few deadbeats than risk destroying the whole system. What made this even more impressive was how they handled settlements when contracts actually came due. Instead of requiring physical delivery of every single contract, which would have turned Osaka into one giant traffic jam of rice carts, they developed a netting system. If you owed 100 koku to one trader and another trader owed you 80 koku, the system would automatically net these out, leaving you to settle just the 20 koku difference. It was like having a massive financial calculator that kept track of everyone's obligations and simplified them down to the smallest possible transactions. The record keeping was obsessive in the best possible way. Every transaction got recorded in multiple ledgers, with copies maintained by the traders, the brokers, and the exchange itself. These weren't simple notes either. They were detailed contracts that specified exactly what was being traded, when it would be delivered, what grade of rice was involved, and what would happen if someone couldn't meet their obligations. They basically invented contract law for financial derivatives before most countries had figured out regular contract law. By midday, when the sun is beating down on the crowded Dojima district, you can see the full scope of what these merchants had created. Price information is flowing like water through an elaborate network that connects every corner of Japan. Mounted messengers are galloping toward Edo with the latest quotes, while signal fires on hilltops carry basic price movements to regional markets faster than you could imagine possible in a world without electronics. The price discovery mechanism was absolutely brilliant. Instead of having one person or group dictate what rice should cost, the Dojima system let thousands of individual decisions by farmers, merchants, warehouse operators, and speculators combine into prices that reflected real supply and demand conditions. It was like having a massive crowdsourced database of economic information, except the crowd was made up of people who'd lose their shirts if they got their predictions wrong. The reference prices set at Dojima didn't just affect rice trading, they rippled through the entire Japanese economy like financial shockwaves. Samurai salaries were calculated based on Dojima rice prices. Tax assessments used Dojima quotes as benchmarks. Even loans and credit arrangements referenced the exchange's daily closing prices. It was like having one giant economic thermometer that told everyone in the country whether they were getting richer or poorer. But the real genius shows up in how they handled the inevitable attempts at market manipulation. Every financial market attracts people who think they can game the system, and Dojima was no exception. Merchants would try to corner rice supplies, spread false rumors about harvest conditions, or coordinate with other traders to artificially move prices in their favor. The exchange's response was swift and brutal. They developed what we'd now recognize as market surveillance systems. Clerks monitored trading patterns for suspicious activity. Warehouse inspectors made surprise visits to verify that the rice backing various contracts actually existed. Information networks tracked unusual price movements back to their sources. When they caught someone trying to manipulate the market, the punishment wasn't just financial, it was social and professional death. Your trading privileges got revoked, your reputation got destroyed, and every other merchant in Japan learned not to do business with you. The shogunate itself eventually took notice of what was happening in Dojima, and their response tells you everything about how important this market had become. Instead of shutting it down as some kind of dangerous speculation, they officially recognized it in 1730 and established formal oversight mechanisms. Government inspectors would show up periodically to review records and make sure the exchange was operating fairly. During times of crisis, like harvest failures or political upheavals, they'd sometimes impose trading limits or temporary restrictions to prevent panic. This government recognition was huge because it legitimized something that was essentially a private financial innovation. The shogunate was saying that forward trading and financial derivatives weren't just acceptable, they were essential to the country's economic stability. It was like getting the medieval equivalent of regulatory approval for cryptocurrency trading. The speculation that developed around rice futures was remarkable in both its sophistication and its occasional absurdity. Professional speculators emerged, who never intended to take delivery of a single grain of rice. They were just betting on price movements. Some developed elaborate strategies involving multiple contracts with different delivery dates, creating profit opportunities regardless of whether prices went up or down. Others specialized in what we'd now call arbitrage, spotting price differences between regions and trading to capture those spreads. The most ambitious speculators would attempt to corner entire harvest seasons, buying up massive quantities of forward contracts and then trying to squeeze other traders who needed rice but couldn't get it anywhere else. These corner attempts usually failed spectacularly, but not before creating wild price swings that rippled through the entire economy. One famous corner attempt in 1749 reportedly involved contracts for over 100,000 koku of rice, enough to feed a small city for a year. The social impact of all this financial activity was profound and sometimes explosive. When rice prices spiked due to speculation or actual shortages, city dwellers who spent most of their income on food would sometimes riot. The government learned to watch dojima prices like a political barometer. Sharp increases often preceded social unrest that could threaten the stability of entire regions. Yet for all the occasional chaos, the system worked remarkably well at its primary job, efficiently allocating rice supplies across Japan and providing price signals that helped everyone from farmers to government officials make better decisions. The innovations developed at dojima spread to other commodity markets throughout Japan and eventually influenced trading systems around the world. As afternoon trading reaches its peak, you can see why this single exchange in Osaka changed everything. They hadn't just created a better way to buy and sell rice, they'd invented the basic architecture of modern financial markets. The concepts of standardized contracts, margin requirements, daily settlement, clearing systems, and regulatory oversight that they developed would eventually become the foundation of every futures exchange on Earth. And they did it all while wearing traditional robes and using brushes and ink instead of computers and telephones. As the afternoon sun beats down on the bustling Dojima district, something extraordinary is happening that most people walking these crowded streets don't even realize. Every single transaction, every shouted bid, every scribbled contract is creating a financial revolution that won't be matched anywhere else in the world for another 2 centuries. These merchants aren't just trading rice, they're accidentally building the blueprint for every stock exchange, commodity market, and derivatives trading floor that will ever exist. The afternoon session brings out the real professionals, and trust me, these guys would make modern hedge fund managers look like amateurs playing with monopoly money. By 2 in the afternoon, you've got speculators running complex multi-contract strategies that involve more mathematical precision than most universities were teaching at the time. We're talking about merchants who could calculate risk-adjusted returns in their heads while simultaneously monitoring price movements across 6 different delivery months. Here's where things get absolutely wild. The most sophisticated traders at Dojima had figured out something that Wall Street wouldn't discover until the 1970s: volatility trading. They realized that rice prices didn't just go up or down, they moved in predictable patterns based on seasonal factors, weather reports, and political developments. Smart traders would buy contracts when volatility was low and sell when markets got choppy, making money not from predicting price direction, but from predicting how much prices would swing around. One legendary trader known as Rice Mountain Yamamoto, and yes, that was his actual nickname, reportedly made a fortune by studying the relationship between early summer rainfall and autumn rice prices. He'd developed his own weather prediction system decades before anyone had heard of meteorology, combining observations from farmers across multiple provinces with his own analysis of cloud patterns and wind directions. The guy was basically running a private weather service to support his trading strategies. But the real sophistication shows up in how they handled credit and financing. Remember, this is happening in a world where most commerce still operated on a barter system, yet Dojima merchants had developed credit instruments that would impress modern investment bankers. They created something called rice-backed promissory notes, basically bonds where the collateral was future rice deliveries instead of gold or silver. These credit instruments solved a massive problem that had plagued agricultural economies forever: the timing mismatch between when farmers needed money and when they got paid. A farmer could issue a promissory note backed by his future rice harvest, sell it to a merchant at a discount, and get cash immediately to buy seeds, tools, and food for his family. The merchant would hold the note until harvest time, then collect the full value in rice, It was like having a futures market and a banking system rolled into one brilliant innovation. The discount rates on these notes became another layer of the market, with different farmers commanding different prices based on their track records, the quality of their land, and even their family reputations. Some established farming families could sell their harvest promises at just a 5% discount, while newcomers might have to accept 20% discounts or higher. The Dojima merchants had basically invented credit scoring using rice as the underlying asset. What made this system even more impressive was how it handled the inevitable defaults. When a farmer couldn't deliver the rice he'd promised because of crop failure, natural disasters, or just plain bad luck, the system didn't collapse. Instead, the merchants had developed sophisticated workout procedures that would make modern bankruptcy lawyers weep with envy. They'd assess the farmer's remaining assets, negotiate payment plans based on future harvests, and sometimes even provide emergency loans to help get the farm back on track. The insurance aspects were equally brilliant. Groups of farmers would pool their risks by cross-guaranteeing each other's promissory notes. If one farm got wiped out by floods, the others would cover his obligations in exchange for a piece of his land or future harvest rights. It was like having crop insurance, except instead of paying premiums to some distant company, farmers were creating mutual aid societies that kept entire communities stable during bad years. By 3 in the afternoon, the real money is moving through systems that most of the world won't see for centuries. Large institutional traders, mainly representing major daimyo lords and wealthy merchant houses, are executing block trades that involve thousands of koku at once. These aren't your typical shouting and pointing transactions either. They're conducted in private rooms behind the main trading floor, with negotiations that can last for hours and involve not just rice but complex packages of different commodities, credit arrangements, and even political considerations. The institutional trading was where you could see the full power of what Dojima had become. A single daimyo's annual rice tax collection might involve contracts worth more than entire provinces' total economic output. These massive positions required careful management across multiple delivery months, quality grades, and regional variations. The merchants handling these trades had to understand not just market dynamics, but also politics, weather patterns, and military logistics. Some of the largest trades involved what we'd now call basis swaps, exchanges between different types of rice or different delivery locations. A daimyo in northern Japan might have tons of cold climate rice, but need warm climate varieties for trade with southern regions. Instead of physically shipping rice across the country, Dojima merchants could arrange swaps where the northern lord's rice would be sold locally, while equivalent amounts of southern rice were delivered to his trading partners. It was like having a nationwide commodity exchange network operated entirely through paper transactions. The clearing and settlement procedures for these massive trades were mind-bogglingly complex. Every large transaction had to be verified by multiple brokers, backed by sufficient margin deposits, and registered with the exchange's official record keepers. The paperwork alone could fill entire chests, with contracts specifying not just quantities and prices, but also quality standards, delivery procedures, and contingency plans for everything from natural disasters to military conflicts. But here's what made the Dojima system truly revolutionary. They figured out how to make all this complexity transparent and standardized. Every major trade was posted on public boards within hours, creating price discovery that benefited everyone from small farmers to government tax collectors. You couldn't hide massive positions or manipulate markets through secret deals because the system was designed to make information flow freely throughout the entire network. The afternoon also brought out the day traders, merchants who specialized in quick profits from short-term price movements. These guys would buy contracts in the morning and sell them before the afternoon session ended, never intending to hold positions overnight. They developed their own specialized techniques for reading market sentiment, including elaborate systems for interpreting the body language and vocal patterns of other traders. One famous day trader called Lightning Tanaka could allegedly predict price movements by watching how different brokers walked across the trading floor. Fast, confident steps meant bullish sentiment. Slow, cautious movements suggested bearish conditions. Whether this actually worked or was just superstition doesn't matter. The point is that dojima traders were looking for every possible edge, no matter how unconventional. The speed of information processing was remarkable for a pre-industrial society. Price changes in the afternoon session would ripple through the entire district within minutes, carried by an army of runners who specialized in memorizing and transmitting market data. These information carriers were like human telegraph systems, capable of delivering complex price quotes and market analysis faster than most people could write them down. Some merchants developed their own private communication networks, using everything from trained birds to coded drum signals to get the market information ahead of their competitors. The most successful trading houses maintained networks of informants in farming regions across Japan, providing early warning about weather conditions, crop diseases, and political developments that could affect rice supplies months before harvest. As the day session winds toward its close, the final hour of trading brings a frenzy of activity that would make modern closing bells look like quiet meditation sessions. This is when all the day's accumulated positions need to be settled, margin calls need to be met, and tomorrow's opening prices start taking shape based on overnight developments. The closing procedures were elaborate ceremonies that balanced financial precision with social ritual. Senior brokers from each major trading house would gather around the main price board, calling out their final positions while clerks verified that all trades balanced properly. Any discrepancies had to be resolved immediately. There was no carrying unmatched trades into the next session. The daily settlement process involved moving enormous amounts of rice and silver through the district's warehouse and banking network. Successful traders might find themselves suddenly owning warehouse receipts for thousands of koku of rice they'd never seen, while others would discover they owed silver payments that required immediate trips to money changers and credit brokers. But the most impressive part of the closing process was how it set up the next day's trading. The final prices from each session became the opening quotes for the following morning, but they were adjusted based on overnight news, weather reports, and political developments that might affect future supply and demand. It was like having a continuous market that never really stopped, even when the trading floor was officially closed. The ripple effects of each day's closing prices spread far beyond Osaka's borders. Courier services would dispatch riders to major cities throughout Japan, carrying not just price quotes, but detailed market analysis that helped regional merchants and government officials understand what the numbers meant for their local economies. By the time most people were sitting down for their evening meals, dojima's influence was already shaping economic decisions hundreds of miles away. The social impact of all this financial activity was profound in ways that went far beyond simple economics. The rice exchange had created a new class of professional financiers who wielded influence rivaling traditional aristocrats and military leaders. These weren't just merchants anymore. They were economic architects who could literally determine whether entire regions prospered or struggled based on their trading decisions. What's most remarkable about the entire dojima system is how it balanced innovation with stability. They were constantly developing new financial instruments and trading strategies, yet they maintained strict rules and oversight that prevented the kind of wild speculation that could destroy the entire economy. It was like having a laboratory for financial experimentation that was also disciplined enough to serve as the foundation for a nation's food supply. The legacy of what happened in that crowded Osaka district during those afternoon trading sessions would eventually spread around the world, carried by merchants, diplomats, and scholars who witnessed firsthand how sophisticated financial markets could operate. But in 1730s Japan, it was just another day of accidentally inventing the future while trying to figure out the most efficient way to feed a nation. As the final bell echoes across the dojima district and the last traders pack up their brushes and ledgers, you're witnessing the end of something that wouldn't be replicated anywhere else on Earth for another 200 years. The merchants heading home through Osaka's narrow streets have just finished another day of accidentally creating the blueprint for every major financial market that would ever exist. Think about what just happened here. While European merchants were still arguing over whether charging interest was morally acceptable, Japanese rice traders had built a complete financial ecosystem that included futures contracts, margin trading, clearing systems, daily mark-to-market settlements, and regulatory oversight. They'd created liquid markets for agricultural commodities that wouldn't exist for delivery until months in the future. They'd developed credit instruments backed by crops that hadn't even been planted yet. The numbers tell the whole story. By the 1730s, the Dojima Rice Exchange was handling transactions worth millions of koku annually, more rice than some entire provinces produced. But here's the really wild part. Most of these transactions never involved moving a single grain of actual rice. They were trading promises, expectations, and financial obligations that existed purely on paper, but somehow managed to feed a nation more efficiently than any system that had come before. The innovations that started in this one district would eventually transform how the entire world thought about risk, price discovery, and financial markets. The Chicago Board of Trade, founded in 1848, used principles that Dojima merchants had perfected over a century earlier. Modern derivatives markets still rely on clearing systems and margin requirements that were basically copied from what these rice traders figured out in the 1700s. But maybe the most impressive thing about the Dojima Rice Exchange wasn't the financial engineering. It was how they solved the fundamental problem that still keeps modern regulators awake at night. How do you create a market sophisticated enough to handle complex financial instruments while maintaining enough oversight to prevent the whole system from collapsing when things go wrong? The answer was something that combined ruthless market discipline with social responsibility. Traders who couldn't meet their obligations didn't just lose money, they lost their ability to participate in the system that controlled Japan's food supply. Brokers who failed to properly manage risk didn't just go bankrupt, they got banned from an industry that determined whether entire regions would eat or starve. This wasn't just capitalism with rice instead of money. It was something entirely new, a market-based system that balanced private profit with public necessity, individual innovation with collective stability. They'd created a financial machine that was sophisticated enough to handle the most complex trading strategies while remaining stable enough to serve as the foundation for a nation's economic survival. The legacy of those afternoon trading sessions in Osaka would eventually circle the globe, influencing the development of financial markets from London to New York to Chicago. But in 1730s, Japan, it was just a bunch of merchants in traditional robes who'd figured out how to trade the future while keeping the present fed. They'd accidentally invented modern finance while trying to solve the age-old problem of getting rice from farms to tables without everyone going broke in the process. And that's probably the most remarkable thing about the Dojima Rice Exchange. It worked. For over 2 centuries, this system of trading, promises, and managing risk kept Japan fed, financed, and financially stable. Not bad for something that started as a way to figure out lunch prices.